Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So let me do a sound check before we kick off. Guys, please feel free to share, subscribe, like, all that good stuff. My wife was like, make sure you say it in the beginning because sometimes your shows goes into oblivion and you may not remember. Or when you do say it, you might have lost part of your audience. So, yeah. And also hit the notification bell. For those of you who don't know, if you're new to my show, I do shows all the time, at any random moment. If the moment hits me, if the mood strikes, I look for a camera and I look to jump into my studio and helm the ship and save the world. Do the news. I like to call it doing the news. So definitely hit the bell. Usually I try to do shows during the day and I'm trying to come up with somewhat of a schedule of doing those shows. But I have to be honest. Sometimes it's 2 in the morning. And if the show is 2 in the morning, I may not necessarily feel like doing a show at 8 in the morning. So it becomes a little weird. But I do have them all over the place. Also, all the supporters of the show, thank you. Like when you guys are on chat, when you guys are able to talk and everything else, and all of us are talking back and forth, we're hitting on an issue, whatever that issue is. Sometimes those issues can be expansive, sometimes those issues are mundane, but either way, we talk about them, we hash it out. We have an open point of view. You have some right-wingers, you have some people who are libertarian, you have some people who are, you have somewhat of a mix. Yes, most lean to the left. So, I'm a lefty. But I like that it doesn't get pissy. Honestly, if nothing else, I like that it doesn't get pissy. So, I want to say that part. Do you remember this? Earlier, recently, when Iran had those protests, where there was an uprising. Now, this is somewhat dangerous. And the reason I say dangerous may be too strong. But it's hard to know whether uprisings are natural uprisings or whether uprisings are manufactured. That's not me being a conspiracy theorist. That's me having some kind of historical context and knows that the United States helped Britain, or helped with the CIA, helped Britain overturn that government once before, using the similar strategy. If you look at Economic Hitman, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, they talk about the same thing, using this thing of evoking this kind of trauma within the country, these protests, these mass uprisings, and so forth. Things in some cases are manufactured. Look at Libya, where they were paying terrorists and to create uprisings in that country, and then they're saying, hey, look at these terrorists, we need to stop Gaddafi because Gaddafi's going to kill a lot of people, so we need to drop bombs. We need to drop bombs. Look at Syria. You have this uprising. Now, the uprising initially may have been legit, but at some point, come on. At some point you had outright terrorists who were trying to just take down the government. It wasn't a political thing. It was people coming from outside the country being supported by the United States and Britain and the European powers to undermine that nation. That's what it was. Call it what it was. We're paying terrorists. When they're talking about the freedom movement or whatever else, that would be like France paying the rebels in the South, and France start calling the Confederacy the Free United States Army. I mean, come on. Call it what it is. Let's be honest. Strip yourself away from the American context and look at this from the standpoint of just this humanitarian, should we be doing this? Fuck. Look at it from the perspective of a constitutionalist. Should the president be using his powers to do this? This is fucking insane. It was insane when Reagan was selling weapons in order to give money to the Contras in order to overturn governments in South America. It's insane when they're doing it over there. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And beyond that, do you remember this, the uprisings in Iran? The United States' response to the uprisings in Iran. The United States warns Iran over response to widespreading protests. The world is watching. The world is watching. The United States has given a critical warning to Iran as thousands of its citizens take to the streets to demand regime change. Protests have swept across Iran in recent days, with many demanding that the government of Hassan Rouhani step down. The White House warned that the government needs to listen to the protesters and suggested that it will respond to any attempt to shut down the protests. Think about that. Think about what he's saying. Whatever you want to think of the Iranian government, I don't care. I'm not even using anything about the Iranian government. I am saying, look at what the United States is saying in that. You have an internal matter in your country. You have a protest. If you do anything to stem the protests in the same way that Britain would tamp down on the protests, so France will step down on the protests, so the United States will tamp down on the protests, so any nation will tamp down on the protests. If you do anything, we will be watching you and we may respond. What do we have to do with the internal politics of Iran? What do we have to do with the internal politics of Iran? The United States wanted to protect the holy protesters. We must protect the protesters. This memo was leaked from Tillerson. Leaked memo schools Tillerson on human rights. A tutorial policy from Brian Hook followed the Secretary of State's controversial remarks about the United States balancing values and interests. The May 17 memo reads like a crash course for a businessman turned diplomat, and its conclusions offer a stark, realistic vision that the United States should use human rights as a club against its adversaries like Iran, China, and North Korea, while giving a pass to repressive allies like the Philippines, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Allies should be treated differently and better than adversaries. Otherwise, we end up with more adversaries and fewer allies, argued the memo, written by Tillerson's influential policy aide, Brian Hook. It's unclear what prompted Hook to author the memo and whether he did so at Tillerson's request amid a furor of foreign policy circles about Tillerson's May 3rd remarks, in which he said it's really important that all of us understand the difference between policy and values, like freedom, human dignity, and the way people are treated. But the memo, a photo of which shown to Politico, suggests that Tillerson, a former CEO of ExxonMobil, was still on a steep learning curve when it comes to foreign affairs. It also seems to foreshadow President Donald Trump's approach to complex politics of human rights overseas. There's a protest in Iran, whether it's manufactured, whether it's legit, who knows? I don't live in Iran, I've never been to Iran, I don't care. Iran's politics is for Iran to figure out. Donald Trump, United States position. Hey, we're going to be watching those protests, buddy, because we care about human rights in this country and we don't want you fucking around with the protesters. Memo leaked. The United States doesn't care about human rights. The United States only cares about human rights from the standpoint of a club to hit our enemies or something to overlook in people who are friends. Jeremy Corbyn comes out and blasts the silence of the West over the murdering of Gaza citizens or Palestinians. There's a protest going on at the Gaza border in Israel, in Gaza. Israeli soldiers, snipers, lined up, if I'm not mistaken, 100 of them, open fire into a crowd of Palestinians. They have no weapons. They're unarmed. Even if you want to make the argument that they have rocks, for all intents and purposes, they're unarmed. You can say a rock is an arm. I think you're insane if you say that compared to a gun, but whatever. That's kind of besides the point. They open into a crowd, shooting 776, if I'm not mistaken, and killing 17. I use the term murder because when you open into a crowd, you know exactly the results that you're going to get. You'll be shocked as shit if you didn't murder anybody. The West, mum, silent. Nobody says a thing. You can hear a pin drop. But Iran deserved a warning because the United States cared about the protesters so much. They cared about the protesters so much. Jeremy Corbyn condemns the West. He blasts the West for this. How can you remain silent? How? They literally massacred 17 people. I think it's up to 27 now. Massacred. Literal massacre. There were more people killed here than were killed at the Boston Tea Party. This was a massacre. Silence. Crickets. You can hear a pin drop. You can hear a pin drop. Let's take a look at the story. Jeremy Corbyn is right. And by the way, they're trying to tar him as being anti-Semitic. It is a weird thing to say you're a Jewish state. You don't represent the religion, dude. You represent a political party. You're a right-wing party, just like any other political party. You can be criticized as such. Your government is not a religious institution. It's not. Stop trying to compare it to such. It's like the Democratic Party saying everybody's racist if they don't vote Democrat. It's like Hillary Clinton says everybody if they're sexist if they don't necessarily go for Hillary Clinton and love Hillary Clinton. Same thing. Politics is politics is politics. You guys are hacks. You are not a religious institution. Stop trying to affiliate yourself with a religious institution. You're a political party. Jeremy Corbyn criticizing you is one politician criticizing the government or another government. End all be all. You have a policy of apartheid in your nation and you don't want to deal with that. So it's easier to say he's anti-Semitic because he's criticizing the state of Israel. Media organizations have harped on this. If you want to see a firestorm, a shit fuckfest of ridiculousness, look at what's taking place with regards to Britain and Jeremy Corbyn trying to tar him as being anti-Semitic. It's fucking ridiculous. They try it nonetheless. And that in no way stops him from criticizing Israel when they're murdering Palestinians. Good fucking job for him holding his shape. Jeremy Corbyn condemns Western silence over Israel's killing of at least 27 Palestinians on the Gaza border. Theresa May urged to back UN's call for an independent international inquiry into firing of live ammunition into a crowd of unarmed civilians. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? If it was anywhere else, wouldn't you do that? You have a government who has for all intents and purposes, a ghetto, an apartheid state, where you have an open-air ghetto of human beings who are trapped into horrible conditions where they don't have adequate water, don't have adequate needs to light, electricity, and the things that they need to survive. I mean, just access to the things that they need. Protesting these conditions to which one country stole the land of another country and is now militarily occupying that particular country. And because it has friends around the world, those friends around the world give it a pass. They're silent on its crimes and atrocities. Well, they've just committed another atrocity. They've murdered multiple people. They fired into a crowd live ammunition of unarmed protesters. They understood the protesters were unarmed. They knew the protesters were unarmed. And they still there with their rifles, hundreds, firing into that crowd. What do you think is going to take place when you fire into a crowd of unarmed civilians? What do you think? Do you think they're going to be hit with bullets? Yeah, that would be a good thought. Do you think some of them would die? That would also be a good thought. So why did you do it? And if you did it, did you know what you were doing? The answer is yes, you knew what you were doing. They put out a tweet that we did exactly, we knew where all of these bullets went, they were well timed and everything else. They understood that that tweet implicated them in murder and deleted that tweet. Let's take a look at this story. Jeremy Corbyn has condemned Israel's killing of at least 27 Palestinians on the Gaza border as an outrage and attacked Western silence about the deaths. In a message read out at a demonstration outside of Downing Street, the Labour leader demanded that Theresa May support the United Nations call for an independent international inquiry. It has to be independent. Because the fact is, Israel has at least one really big ally, the United States. And that ally has been blocking pretty much any kind of UN call to action. It's been blocking all of it. Britain should also consider stopping the sale of arms to Israel that could be used in violation of international law. Because Israel is in violation right now, as we speak, in violation of international law. They're stealing land and expanding their borders. And they're not allowing those people to return. Again, return of refugees, part of international law, completely ignoring it. The world does squat. The world does squat. You'll go into Libya to save people who you believe Gaddafi is going to kill. What about Israel? Why aren't you willing to send the United States troops into Israel in the same way you're willing to do that in these other Muslim nations? If you're going to help somebody, help somebody. Mr. Corbyn spoke at least 9 more Palestinians were killed and hundreds more injured by Israel gunfire, some reportedly shot in the head or upper body, including multiple journalists, people wearing press badges, shot. The latest deaths came a week after 18 Palestinians lost their lives when Israel soldiers opened fire at similar demonstrations in support of the right to return to land lost to Israel in 1948. The human rights spokeswoman, Elizabeth Throssell, has suggested that shooting could amount to a willful killing of civilians, a breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Sounds like they've just committed war crimes. They fired into a crowd of civilians that they knew were civilians. That sounds like war crimes. Now, you can make the argument that, yeah, they said they were peaceful. Well, we didn't know that they were going to be peaceful. I mean, somebody may have had a gun somewhere. Somebody may have had a weapon somewhere. You had a bunch of snipers on roofs, and you gave the order to fire into a crowd. Did somebody shoot at you? Now, I would imagine you're going to say, hey, somebody shot at us. Why on earth would you take Israel's story in this? Oh, yeah, somebody shot at us. What evidence do you have that somebody shot at them? What we know is there were a group of peaceful protesters. Were they pissed? Yes, they were protesters. Did they have rocks? Maybe. Somebody said they were burning tires. Okay, possibly. Does that demand or does that require several snipers, 100 snipers, to shoot into a crowd of people? That's what I'm asking. Like, I'm just trying to make this point. Even if you grant everything that Israel is saying, minus the gunfire, because you have to take their word for it, and I don't. But if you grant everything else, tires, rocks, you still had snipers planted into a building to which you were shooting out into a crowd of human beings, a sea of bodies, a sea of human beings, hitting 776. They were peaceful protesters. This wasn't a war. This wasn't a military conflict, and yet they treated it as such. If this was a repressive dictator, what would the responses be around the world? Huh? What would the responses be? Would they want to go into their country to get that guy? What would the responses be? Put it this way, they would at least be vocal about it, and in this case, mum. They're an ally, so we don't want to say anything about just murder and willful murder. Take a look at this article, Truth Out. In the wake of Gaza massacre, Israel leaders should be prosecuted for war crimes. On March 30th, Israeli Defense Force soldiers shot 773 unarmed Palestinian protesters in Gaza, killing 17 and wounding 1,400. 20 remain in critical condition. The protesters were marching to demand the internationally mandated right of return to refugees to their cities and villages in what now constitutes Israel. The Israeli leaders who ordered the massacres were in a clear violation of international law. They should be prosecuted for war crimes. Premeditated use of deadly force against peaceful protesters. The use of deadly force against peaceful protesters was premeditated. The IDF deployed 100 snipers to the border fence between Gaza and Israel, where 30,000 to 40,000 Palestinians had gathered for a Great March of Return. In a damning tweet later deleted, the IDF wrote, "Nothing was carried out uncontrolled. Everything was accurate and measured, and we know where every bullet landed." That was a tweet that was put out after shooting into a crowd of civilians, unarmed civilians, murdering civilians. If you go by his tweet, and I saw the tweet, somebody had a picture of the tweet. It's not, I don't know if it's in this one, but I've seen it. They knew what they were doing. We shot those bullets out. We knew where those bullets were going to land. It hit 773 people and murdered others. If we knew where they were going to land, then it's murder. They were premeditated. They knew what they were doing. They deleted the tweet because the tweet gives across this idea of, oh wait, that seems a little callous, seeing as we shot bullets into a crowd of unarmed civilians. Let's keep going. And I'll go back to the other article. I want to let the author make their point. Jihad al-Jihadi, director of the ICU at the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza, told Al Jazeera that all of the injured people who came to the hospital were shot in the head, pelvic joints, or knee joints. This shows that Israeli forces were shooting to kill or to cause disabilities. They were snipers. They were snipers. It wasn't random fire. It wasn't a machine gun where they just mowed down a crowd. They were snipers. They were specifically shooting into a crowd. You can imagine that if they were snipers, they were looking at particular things that they wanted to shoot, meaning we're shooting people in the head or we're shooting people to disable them. We want you to remember or we want you to die. B'Tselem, a Jerusalem-based human rights organization, characterized the military orders as shoot to kill unarmed Palestinians taking part in the demonstrations. Israeli soldiers were not merely using excessive force, but were apparently acting on orders that all but ensured a bloody military response to the Palestinians' demonstrations. Eric Goldstein, Deputy Director of Human Rights Watch, Middle East and African Division, stated. Senior IDF officers told Haaretz before the protest that a large number of casualties was a price we would be willing to pay to prevent a breach of the fence at the border. Israeli leaders fostered the false narrative that Hamas was sponsoring the protests. Jason Greenblatt, U.S. envoy to Israel-Palestinian negotiations, followed suit, tweeting, Hamas is encouraging a hostile march on the Israel-Gaza border and accused Hamas of inciting violence against Israel. This is called pretext. This is pretext. There are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Syria dropped the sarin gas. Or in this case, Hamas is doing an event under the guise of a peaceful protest. They wanted to do something and they used a pretext of Hamas in order to come up with a rational or something that they can use as a fig leaf justification for murder, shooting people in the head and shooting peaceful protesters in the knees. The silence of the West on this is shameful. It's profoundly shameful. And you lose legitimacy when you're talking about other issues. You have your favorites. Your document is very clear. You have your favorites. And you're not going to say anything bad about your favorites, which means you lose complete legitimacy when you're talking about selective justice for other people who you don't particularly like. They're murderers. They should be brought up on war crimes. They should not be protected by the United States and the United Security Council. In the same way that they would go after somebody like in the Philippines, they should be able to go after the Israeli leaders for doing something like this. This is murdering human beings. It's bad enough that you've stolen their land. It's bad enough you have an open-air ghetto. It is bad enough that your country is an apartheid state. You also have to add to it by murder. Call it what it is. You knew where those bullets were landing. Heads and knees. We want to kill you. We want to disable you. We want you to remember what took place on this day so you don't do it again. Let's go back to Jeremy Corbyn. The UN human rights spokeswoman Elizabeth Throswell has suggested that shooting could amount to willful killing of civilians, a breach of the 4th Geneva Convention. I don't understand how these people look at this stuff and then are like, it could. Were they snipers? Yes. Were they civilians? Yes. Were they given the order to shoot civilians? Yes. Did they know that if they were shooting into a crowd of 40,000 that they will be killing civilians? They were snipers. Did they know where they were aiming? Yes. If all of these questions are yes, why is there doubts? Why is there doubts? Yes, let them make whatever defense that they want, but you should have a prosecutor, and that prosecutor should go after them. And at the very least, it should be up for a conversation on whether or not this constitutes war crimes. In his message, Mr. Corbyn said, the killing and wounding of yet more unarmed Palestinian protesters yesterday by Israeli forces in Gaza is an outrage. The majority of the people on the Gaza Strip are stateless refugees subjected to decade-long blockade and denied the basic human and political rights. More than 2/3 are relying on humanitarian assistance, with limited access to the most basic amenities such as water and electricity. They have a right to protest against their appalling conditions and the continuing blockade and occupation of the Palestinian land, and in support of their rights to return to their homes and the rights to self-determination. Mr. Corbyn added that firing live ammunition into crowds of unarmed civilians is illegal and inhumane and cannot be tolerated. The silence from international powers with the responsibility of bringing just settlements of the Israel-Palestinian conflict must end, he added. The UK government must support the United Nations Secretary General's call for an independent international inquiry into the killing of protesters in Gaza and review the sale of arms that could be used in violation of international law. Yes! Yes! Yes. That's what I want to hear. That's what I want to hear. That's true. That's honest. That's a decent appraisal of what's taking place and what literally took place. And it's called into account, how are you people being silent when those people are being murdered? This wasn't Hamas. You used Hamas as a pretext in order to murder and kill those people at the border. You wanted to stop those people from coming to the border, and you wanted to send a message to the people who were protesting. Call it what it is. Now, yeah, I am inferring into this because I'm inferring politics into the behavior of the people into it. I think you would be insane not to infer politics into the behavior, but fair enough. You can call me a cynic. It is what it is. What we do know is they fired into a crowd of civilians and murdered several of those civilians, kneecapping and shooting others in the head. The other guy came out and said, we know where each bullet landed. So, take out the cynicism. Take them at their own words. They knew where the bullets landed. It was a controlled maneuver, to which they did, and they ended up killing and wounding a lot of people. Is it illegal to murder or not? From international law standpoint, it is illegal to kill civilians willfully or not. Which one is it? If you have a law that says dogs should not poop in a yard and you must clean up, you know, if dogs go to the bathroom, and right beside the board that has that law on it, there's dog excrement, you understand that it calls into questions your legitimacy. It could have been a kid that wrote that on the board. Maybe that's not really a law. Where's your legitimacy? Where? Where's your legitimacy for anything else? For those nations that you don't like, where's your legitimacy? You understand that you lose legitimacy when dealing with issues like this. You're telling us that murdering civilians is supposedly against the law. You have a case of the willful murder of civilians by a state, a repressive apartheid rogue state. Is there going to be a consequence or not? Is there going to be a consequence or not? And if there's not, don't tell me shit about anything else from any other nation that you care about. If you don't care about this, I'm not going to care about that, because you lose your legitimacy. Selective justice is not justice. Either you care about the people who are being murdered, or you don't. Or you don't. Don't tell me about the guy in the Philippines if you're not going to do shit about this. This is active murder. Large-scale murder of protests. Protests by people who have a right to be angry. You've stolen their land. They have a right to be angry. Let's see who's here. I wanted to show this juxtaposition, or at least my goal, between how the United States responds in one hand to a country it doesn't like, and how it responds on the other hand to a country that it does like, and show you this jarring thing of, we don't care about human rights. Human rights, again, like the Tillerson memo, it's just a club. That's all it is. My goal in this was to show that, yes, Tillerson's memo is right. We don't care about human rights. We care about, there's certain people who interests we like, and others we don't. If you're towing our line, everything is great, we'll back you up. Doesn't matter what you do. You could be Saudi Arabia, you could be Egypt, you can have a repressive regime. Don't care. If you're somebody we don't like, oh, we're going to give you mean eyes. We're going to give you threats. We're going to say how horrible and repressive your government is. We're going to talk about all the bad things. The point I'm getting at is, it's bogus. It's politics. It's BS. They do this as a mass. They do this purely just to use for political hit points. You have a situation where the United Nations understands that Israel has just murdered a large number of people at a protest, shooting into a crowd of unarmed protesters. Does the United Nations do anything or not? Thank you, Jeremy Corbyn, for saying something. Thank you, Jeremy Corbyn, for saying something. Unfortunately, it's one of very few voices. It's one of very few voices. Let's see, who's here? I don't want to keep this one too long, so. Let's see. Disproportionate representation, not enough non-Jewish diversity. J. Scott, what Israel is doing to Gaza is what Jamal does to my wife. That's funny. Shooting people in the knees and the nuts is a tactic Israel soldiers have admitted to using. They said they're using controlled precise fire that will be damning in a real court. Well, you saw his tweet. Like, do we honestly believe that the military guy is tweeting something out? He's just for shits and giggles tweeting? No. He's tweeting it because he's probably telling the truth. They were snipers. Like, look, I guess my point, I'm saying they were snipers because if it was, let's say it was an AK, it was a machine gun, a rapid fire, then you're just mowing into a crowd, but that's not what they're doing. These are snipers. They're targeting, looking at, making a determination on what they want to hit. They were precise. And he's right. We knew exactly where each bullet went because we had sniper fire aiming at specific points. Shooting people in the nuts, in the knees, and the head. That's so fucking sick. That's so fucking sick. It's amazing. The UN loses all legitimacy. The Hague loses all legitimacy with stuff like this. How do you let that pass? How on earth do you let that pass? Jamal, at some point you're going to need to mod. There is some bot or cyborg in the chat. A cyborg is in the chat. What is a cyborg in the chat? I don't see it, John. Let's see. In a situation, should Israel abandon the border and open fence? Ian Carmelio. Here's the thing. I am not on that. I'm not one of those people who have this two-dimensional view of Palestinians. Like, what I mean is, there's been a lot of bad blood at this point. Let's be honest. There has. How do people respond when they're put in really shitty situations for long periods of time? How? It's not like they're going to be the most, nicest, kindest, most gentlest, I love you to bits. No, it's hard work in order to try some kind of reconciliation, trying to find some kind of deal and some kind of agreement and interaction between the two. But you have to do it at some point. Like, I don't have this thing of they should just open the border, open the fence, and, No, I never had that perspective. I never had that perspective when I was in Israel, when I was in Palestine. And I was having conversations with the people who were there. Human beings respond a particular way when those human beings have been put under stress and depravity and not having access to the things that they need. And the Palestinians have a right to be pissed off. Hamas it is absolutely consistent with the way human beings seem to behave when they are under stressful, difficult situations to tilt to the right. It happens in America. It happens in pretty much all these countries. My reasoning for saying that I want Jeremy Corbyn to stand strong from the standpoint of the left and hold his shape was because oftentimes the left gets swept away when you have something going on. So Woodrow Wilson, you have a war. Now you have these elements on his left, socialists, communists. You have all of these other groups. And he ends up locking up Eugene Debs because Eugene Debs was against the war. Well, that's a leftist position. That position was to the left of Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was able to use these additional powers accrued to the president during times of war and make the justification that, hey, we're in a war. We can't have this guy mouthing off in this way. Get the fuck out of here. The left gets swept away in these things. Or has a tendency or has a potential. People tilt to the right. It becomes a difficult thing to hold the position on the left. When Jeremy Corbyn, a recent example, Jeremy Corbyn questions, loyal opposition questions, look, we need to get more evidence that this was Russia. We need to bring in an international body. We need to not just have this knee-jerk reaction that this is Russia. They booed him. They booed him. They jeered him. Boo! His own party. Boo! Boo! It sounds like you're saying something other than shit on Russia. We don't like that. Boo! Boo on you, man. Boo on you. It's an amazing thing. They didn't care about the evidence. They didn't care about research. They didn't care about investigation. They just wanted to jump to the conclusion of it was Russia. Corbyn, having a rational response, gets booed. Like, understand what I'm saying. If people tilt to the right in these type of situations. So, No, I don't necessarily think they should open up the borders just willy-nilly, but I do think they need to have some kind of reconciliation in regards to how they're going to go about their affairs. And this, shit like this, should not take place. Fact is, they're doing all of this just to stand still. Meaning, defending the border and everything else. You can have a common sense, rational interaction in a way that tries to decompress this particular issue, but Israel doesn't want to do that. Israel wants to continue to steal more land against international law. They want to continue to take. They want to take more and more and more. They want to take it all. They have the United States backing them in the UN, so they don't have to do anything about it. And you have, oddly enough, the United States as a supposedly a deal maker in this, even though they're clearly in the bank for one of the sides who's in this negotiation. This is a farce. Call it what it is. When the media talks about this stuff, they're clownish. They're clownish when they talk about this stuff. Jews control the media and the United States government. They want to import third worlders into the first world to make sure that there are no ethnic majorities in any nation so they can rule over everyone. I don't know, man. That's a little strong. That's a little strong. I don't know who they is. Ian Carmelo, I won't like you less if you say no, thanks. What do you mean, open the borders? I don't think you should open the borders like that. I think you've been insane to do that. You've created too much conflict. Yeah, I don't think you can do it. But that being said, this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable. Absolutely, this is unacceptable. All right, I'm going to end this one. I'm not going to keep this one too long. I don't know if I have another one tonight. I think I might. I want to look around. Oh, yes, I do. Sky News. Sky News. They buried a story on the Russia thing. It's fascinating. Or at least I think it's fascinating. The guy who they buried the story on, they didn't show it on their web. He comes out. He says, look, I think my story was extremely interesting. These guys have made up some weird ideas on why they didn't want to put my story out. But here's my story. You can see it for yourself. I made a copy. And so I am going to show the copy that Sky News doesn't want to show because I think it should be shown. So I'm going to end this here. Guys, I want to thank all you for showing up. It's Saturday night. A bunch of other people like me are here. I don't have anything else to do on Saturday night, so let's do the news. Even if I'm doing the news by myself, the show will go up and people can see it when they see it. But hope some of you can join me. I'll see you guys in about 20 minutes or so. Thanks, guys. J. Scott, Jamal, check the Syria chemical attack today. There was a Syria chemical attack today? No shit. I'll check it out, Jay. In fact, I'll check it out now. So, you know, Russia kept saying they're planning a chemical attack. They're planning a chemical attack. They're planning a chemical attack. They're going to use this chemical attack as a pretext to attack Syria if they do this. If they do this. Yeah, I'm going to check this out now because that's a big deal. Like, I can't get across how big of a deal that is. That's China goes to Russia. And when China goes to Russia, they overtly tell the news, we want to ensure our military pact with Russia. And we want the United States to know that we're united in this. Other nations talk. Meaning in the same way that the United States has this intelligence, China, Russia, Iran, Syria, all of these places have their own intelligence. If their intelligence is telling them that the United States is working with terrorists and those terrorists are moving sarin gas and that they're planning for an attack, Russia comes out and says, our intelligence are telling us this. This is what's taking place. The assumption being that the United States is going to use this as a pretext in order to attack Damascus. Russia is not going to allow that. Russia is not going to allow that. What's the impasse? How do you get past that? If Russia says, if you do this, we will strike your forces, what is the response of the United States? What is the response of China? What is the response of Iran? Syria? All of these countries are aligned. They've drawn their sides. They've been drawing their sides for God knows how long. Do you know that China and Russia is trying to put out a new currency, a new world currency? They want to take the currency away from the dollar and put it back on the gold standard. Russia has been accumulating gold like gangbusters for the past few years, with this idea of, if it goes back to the gold standard, the United States has not been accumulating gold. The United States is wholly, you know, that's the dollar's fiat currency. It's not built on anything. All of that $20 trillion of debt, how? I'm making a point to you that this is massive in regards to geopolitical politics. People are eating their Wheaties and playing their Xbox, and these guys are coming up with a pretext for a larger war. Coming up with a pretext for war. Jay, I'm going to check it out now. Thanks for giving me a heads up on that, man. All right, guys, I'm going to end this here. I'll probably see you guys in 20 minutes after checking out whatever the fuck is taking place in Syria. Thanks, guys.